We now turn the spotlight onto Great Grandfather Charles Edward Henry Plampin. Great grandfathers have a particular place in family histories. They feel almost within reach, but not quite. The times they lived in have patchy familiarity from the novels we've read and the history we've learnt. Their names may live on in occasional conversation amongst our elders about past relatives or in the naming of children. The ripples of their lives may quietly wash up against ours in ways as yet unrecognized. They are the bridge between the before times and the present. We met our Charles in episode 9, born in 1863, at the little cottage at 8 New House, Gestingthorpe, Essex. The indomitable Queen Victoria had already been on the throne for 25 years when our Charles was born. Her longevity was delivering England peace and progress at an astonishing pace. Prosperity was being driven by industrial expansion, particularly in textiles and machinery. This in turn fueled economic growth and exports. The industrial might enabled expansion of the empire. Britain used advancements like railways, steamships, and telegraphs to connect and control its vast colonial territories, which in turn supplied raw materials and acted as markets for British goods, adding further to prosperity. A map from around 1863, when our Charles was born, would show the British Empire reaching across the globe to vast territories in Canada, South Africa, Nigeria, India, Burma, Australia, New Zealand, and many islands in the Caribbean, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. These colonial holdings, still growing in number, were already a massive global network connected by trade routes and naval power, and the empire dominating sea lanes and a significant portion of the world's land mass and population. Of course, power concentrates in few hands. Back at the little cottage at 8 New House, Gestingthorpe, Essex, none of this wealth and advancement was in evidence at the time of our Charles's birth. Gestingthorpe remained a primarily agricultural village. Charles's father laboured in agriculture on meagre wages. His mother Mary looked after the children. There were already 2 siblings in the house when Charles came into the world, elder brother Joseph and half-sister Harriet, who would soon be enlisted as a child in straw plaiting to bring much-needed money into the house. By 1881, at 17 years old, Charles was following in his father's footsteps as an agricultural labourer, work he had most likely done for the past 5 years. By now he had 3 brothers ranging from 12 to 19 years old, all working as agricultural labourers. My heart sinks at the narrowness of options these boys faced. None of them had benefited from compulsory and free schooling, which would have offered them, perhaps, a route into the trades or other jobs where literacy would have currency. 4 years later, at 21, our Charles married. His bride, Eliza Walford, was a silk weaver from Wickham St. Paul in Essex. Silk weaving had declined as a cottage industry at this point and had moved to mechanized factories. This allowed for an expansion of patterns which could be reliably reproduced. Patterns like these. We can get a glimpse of the range of patterns offered from this pattern book from these times, preserved in a textile archive. Most likely, Eliza was working before her marriage in a factory owned by the Courtauld family, who dominated silk manufacturing in Essex. The Courtauld factories employed 3,000 people, a staggering number in those days. Eliza's labours would be contributing to the textile industry that was driving English trade and expansion. The young couple set up home on Halstead Road, Stisted, in Essex. Here are some photos of the village close to this time. Here is the sweep of the road into town, and the village store. When we catch up with our Charles and Eliza in 1891, our Charles is 27 years old and still working as an agricultural labourer. Eliza is at home looking after 3-year-old Alice and baby Clara. The 2 children were baptized in All Saints' Church, Stisted. I can imagine the proud parents entering the church with babe in arms here and walking up this aisle to the christening font. The 2 names, Alice and Clara, give me a jolt of recognition. Out of the sands of time, I have clear memories as a teenager of my mother mentioning Aunt Alice and Aunt Clara. I had no way then of picturing them in their lives, of knowing how we all fitted together. Now they emerge as the 2 elder sisters in the home my grandfather would be born into, great aunts. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The next time we have records for our great-grandfather in the 1901 census, things have changed quite significantly. Our Charles is now 37 years old. He has moved his family to his new workplace, Scotty's Farm in Easthorpe, Essex. Easthorpe is near Colchester. We can find the location of Scotty's Farm running along the Easthorpe Road, as it still exists today. It is now a rural tourism business offering accommodation in yurts and repurposed old stables, which, as will emerge later, are of significance to our Charles. When Charles was working at Scotty's Farm, he had a busy household. The family has grown by 4 children. 14-year-old eldest daughter Alice is no longer at home. We find her living 60 miles away at Victor Road, Islington, in London, where we can presume she was in service, because in the closing days of Victorian England, a quarter of all young girls and women were servanted to wealthy houses. If you've watched Downton Abbey, you'll have a good sense of Alice's work. It was increasingly common for regional girls to go to London for work, reflecting the growing wealth of the middle and upper classes in the city and the growing inequity between city and regions. Alice stays at the Victor Road address for 5 years, suggesting she was a good worker and had established her role in the household. Back at Scotty's Farm, Alice's father, our great-grandfather Charles, had changed jobs. He had transitioned from an agricultural labourer up to a horseman. This represented a big step up, as it was seen as a skilled role that carried significant responsibility. Horses were the engine of farms at this time. Charles would have supervised the care of the horses on Scotty's Farm, their water, feed, bedding, and harnessing, as well as the horses' work of ploughing, reaping, sowing, harrowing, and carting of crops grown on Scotty's Farm. He would definitely have had younger men working under him. I can't tell you my delight in discovering this family connection to horses. I've always had a strong affinity with horses and was a mad horse girl. When I finished school, I was determined to find a career that involved them. Totally against family wishes, I applied to be a working student at Suzanne's riding school in London's Greenbelt, so I could obtain my British Horse Society instructor qualifications. Amazingly, my application was accepted, so off I went to England, very nervous, as it was the first time I was away from home. But I soon knew I was in exactly the right place. I loved being immersed in horses and their care and training, and learning how to teach others to love riding as much as I did. We received expert tuition across all aspects of equitation. The course was the most physically and emotionally demanding qualification I have ever done. I still apply its learnings to my life. I had every intention of returning to Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia, to open a riding school, but this dream was thwarted when my parents decided to leave the colony. I love the discovery that our great-grandfather Charles was a horse person too, and now wonder if this affinity with horses was carried through the blood. When we look at the 1901 census, where our Charles is listed as a horseman at Scotty's farm, we can see he is 37 at the prime of his life. He and wife Eliza have 5 children at home, ranging from 8 years old to 4.5 months. We can see our great-aunts Clara and Jessie, spoken of by my mother. Our great-aunt Em was not yet born. We can also see the eldest son, Frederick, 5 years old at this stage, and his brother Walter, who will grow into our grandfather and father of my dad. You might remember our Charles's wife Eliza was a Walford, and here we see that her brother, William Walford, is boarding with the family while working on Scotty's farm. We can only imagine that our Charles learnt that more labourers were needed and put in a good word for his brother-in-law. This 1901 census is a snapshot in time. It gives us a mental picture of a growing, happy family, with Dad moving up a little in the world. It was the year Queen Victoria died, and the beginning of the Edwardian period under Edward VII. At the time of the 1901 census, young Frederick is written into the official record for the first time since his baptism. At 5 years old, he had his life ahead of him. No one in the family at that time of the census could know that 16 years later, Frederick would be killed in World War I. When Frederick was 14, his father, our great-grandfather Charles, died at 46 years of age. Charles is buried at Easthorpe, St. Mary the Virgin Church, the closest village to Scotty's farm. 4 years later, in July 1914, World War I broke out. Frederick signed up for service at the London and Essex Recruitment Centre just before Christmas 2015. He was 19 years old. He joined the King's Royal Rifle Corps and was assigned to Flanders, Belgium, to assist the Allies to capture the by now ruins of Passchendaele village from the Germans. The bigger mission was to break through the German lines at this village and capture the Belgian coast. Frederick would have arrived at Passchendaele to find a hellscape. The heaviest rain in a generation had fallen on the low-lying land, turning the battlefield into a quagmire. Duckboards had been lain down to help troops cross over the waist-high mud. A wrong step off the duckboard resulted in men, horses, and pack mules drowning in the quicksand mud. Trenches were dug into the soaking land, and men installed in them to win more territory. They continuously stood in 2 foot of water until relieved for a short break, with many suffering from the infamous trench foot, resulting in open sores, infections, and amputations. Many battles ensued as the Allies and the Germans struggled to take territory from each other. Each battle had its own name, but are now incorporated by military historians under the umbrella name of the Battle of Passchendaele. Frederick would have experienced constant heavy artillery bombardment in the trenches and poisonous gas attacks. He would also have been engaged in forward pushes, climbing out of the cover of the trenches and rushing through cloying mud towards the enemy with just a rifle in hand. The casualties on both sides were unprecedented. By November 1917, the Allies had captured the village of Passchendaele and controlled the surrounding territory. The Germans retreated. The battlefield turned quiet. Our Frederick would have patrolled the trenches, with rifle ready, watching for any return of the enemy. But all remained quiet. In the new year, the Allied commanders started discussing withdrawing their troops from Passchendaele so they could be used elsewhere. The withdrawal began covertly, so the Germans wouldn't be aware of it. Frederick was left with his battalion in the forward position to maintain a presence. Unbeknown to the Allies, the Germans were planning to retake Passchendaele in order to force the British forces back to the Channel ports and out of the war. They started their spring offensive on the 7th of April, The Allies scrambled to bring troops back to the area. Multiple battles ensued, with our Frederick in the midst of it. On the 17th of April, 10 days after the start of the German spring offensive, the British forces attacked the German Fourth Army on its strategically high position at Kemmel. The Germans were repulsed and fled. This began a wave of Allied forces' wins that regained previously held territory from the Germans. But on this day, the first Battle of Kemmel, our Frederick was killed in action. His body was never recovered. Perhaps he was injured and sank into the mud and was smothered and drowned. Perhaps he was blown up by heavy artillery with no remains to retrieve. We will never know. One mercy is his father, our great grandfather Charles, died before his eldest son was killed, and so was spared this heartache. But this left his mother Eliza to bear her grief alone, with no scant comfort of a burial. We do know that 15 months after Frederick's death, his mum received a war pension of 9 shillings from the British Army. The Battle of Passchendaele and subsequent battles over the territory are recorded by military historians as an immense and brutal failure in terms of its strategic objectives to break through the German lines and capture the Belgian coast. This series of battles resulted in massive casualties for all sides. 500,000 men lost their lives in the Battle of Passchendaele. In spite of this, and like so many other battles of World War I, the attacks continued for months and the gains were minimal. The name Passchendaele has come to stand for senseless slaughter and the futility of trench warfare, as small gains made were later easily retaken. In the nearby city of Ypres in Belgium, a city gate called the Menin Gate survived the war. On this gate are inscribed the names of 55,000 Allied troops whose bodies were never found. Buglers play the last post at the Menin Gate every day, honouring the memory of those lost men, including our Frederick. It gives me some comfort to know that he is not forgotten, and that every day, over in Belgium, in the city of Ypres, a burglar is calling our great Uncle Frederick's memory to mind. One of the most famous and influential English poets of World War I was Wilfred Owen. He was himself enlisted and a soldier who was killed in action at age 25, exactly 1 week before the signing of the armistice in 1918 that would end World War I. Wilfred is known for his realistic poetry about the horrors of trench warfare, honed from his personal experience. His poem, Dulce et decorum est, challenges Roman philosopher Horatius' saying that it is sweet and proper to die for one's country. Dulce et decorum est. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone was still yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or in lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud, of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, You would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.